I present to you my little short story, Romanian Nightmare. Myths are not stories that are untrue. Rather, they are tales that don't fit neatly into the historical record, which serve as a foundation to a culture. Deep, deep in the dark lands where the pine trees make their forests black in nightfall, the sounds of nocturnal animals soothe the uneasy tension that stir the nerves like a scorching wildfire. And yet, the quiet sounds of calmness are interrupted by roaring avalanche of bawling calls of a herd of sheep. Two shepherds are attending to their flock, and yet are hurrying, for they have lost track of time and are trying to herd the flock back to their gate home, located at the shepherd's place of rest. The shepherds are of old and young ages. The grandfather and his grandson are trying to make their way through the forest, and now with the distractions of the disorganized flock and the clocking sun, they've lost themselves in the abysmal wood. The grandfather flicked from left to right, attempting to find his senses and bring his grandson back to this place of home. On one side, he can see vegetation darkening on one side, and on the other, not even a crack of light. The old man's nerves and blood start to rise, and the worries start to infect his mind, and his fear grows, especially for the grandson's safety. While most men who venture to these lands are unfamiliar with its lands, inhabitants, and geological location, the old man has lived here for his entire life. He knows what's out there in the shadows, hiding, lurking, stalking, waiting. "Come, boy," he said, with a voice deep and confident, being used as a curtain to hide his worry.
"What now, grandfather? I can't make anything out with this lantern."
A look at the 8-year-old's face is just another reminder for the grandfather of dread and urgency to get out of these woods as fast as possible. For anything to happen to the boy, the grandfather wouldn't forgive himself, especially his mother and papa.
"It's okay, my little pup. We'll get out of here eventually,"
the grandson, with a voice of slight terror increasing, explained.
"But the night covers the lands in shadows, and the sheep grow in fear. With no light, they can warn themselves and us of any predators."
Which then flicked an idea in the grandfather's head.
"Well, my boy, perhaps we should make light of the situation."
"Grandfather, please," with a smirk creeping up his face. Using the lanterns, they went not too far away from the sheep flock to grab tinder wood to make fire. That way, it will help the sheep see better in the dark, and it can warn them of any predators hunting them. While the warm, cool fire soothes the cold atmosphere of the night, the grandson sits in silence for a while with a ponderous look on his face, starting to wonder on a question. A sigh escaped the grandfather's grizzled mouth.
"There we go. Nice fire to keep us warm for the night, until the sun can come up. Then we will go back home in the morning."
The grandson soon started to notice worry on his grandfather's eyes, and his pondering was too much. He decided to ask. "Grandfather, might I ask, why are you such in a rush to leave the woods? And why do you look so nervous?"
"What, my boy? I'm not sure what you're speaking about,"
the grandfather explained with a confident, nervous laugh. However, the boy knew he was playing with him. "Grandfather, you have looked after me alongside my mama and papa. You told me your stories of war and adventure. We played together with sticks, pretending we were swashbuckling rogues on a grand adventure, and the games of chase, and our fun times with your farm animals. Even when you don't mean to, you always manage to show your true feelings on a situation. I've even mapped out what emotions you share to me, so I know you're lying to me. You've been my oldest friend after all." The grandfather's face turned into a scared, understandable look from that confident smile. With a low, long sigh of relief, he said,
"Aye, 'tis true. You know me better than anyone else, my on my problems.
The grandson again tried to get a glimpse into the old man's kind gaze, who's avoiding it. Please, grandfather, tell me. The grandfather took a 10-second pause and said,
The lands that you know them as you see them as, is not entirely all that's there.
The grandchild spoke in confusion. I don't know what you're talking about. The grandfather explained further.
There are secrets that have been engraved deep into the surface of the lands, dark and unholy things that have the desire to hunt man and tear us apart, to give any child a hellish nightmare of unimaginable pain that they had never experienced.
What are you saying, grandfather? Said the child. And the grandfather, with all his fear put into his voice, said,
My child, the dead walk the earth.
The small eyes of Worry turned into a confused horror. What? He said.
Let me tell you about the Strigoi. Legends say that when we die, our souls will go to a realm where we are burned in a fiery pit, a place of pain and punishment where demons decide how best to torment you. But there are instances of where there are men who are so corrupt, sadistic, cruel, and brutal that they are admired by the other demons, and they decide to bring them back as a Strigoi, an undead, blood-sucking creature of the night that is gaunt and skin paler than milk, with abilities such as shape-shifting, invisibility, heightened senses that can track you down in the harshest conditions, incredible strength that can lift 20 of the strongest bulls, and speed that can outpace even the fastest of swallows, and claws that can tear your neck in half.
Drips of sweat start to make their way down the face of the grandchild, and yet he can't decide whether it was the fire's glow of heat or the chilling realization of a gaunt, undead monster walking around his home, his village, the lands he grew up to know. He could never imagine the sweet soils of youth could be rotten with this unholy fact.
And something you should never do, the grandfather continued, is to never look into their eyes. They may be filled with crimson hate and be bloodshot, but its features can also be soft and inviting and pleasant, that can allure and enchant any strong-willed man and strong-spirited woman.
The boy looked down at his hand, and it started to shake and twitch with an untapped fear that he hasn't experienced. The fear of the unknown. He doesn't know whether or not he's telling the truth. If he's lying, he shouldn't be scared for death waiting at his door, so he must not be telling the truth. There is that little voice at the back of his head telling him otherwise.
And that's why I'm scared to get the flock and you safe back home, the grandfather added. I have the sense that the Strigoi will come out of the shadows and take you away from me.
The grandchild then said, But grandfather, a creature like that couldn't really exist, right? The abilities, the gaunt corpse that has risen from the grave? Then the last words that left the grandfather's lips shook the boy's senses in his head.
And it was, sometimes, some myths have truths to them.
The boy sat there for a second until he said, My, the Strigoi sounds like an awful beast to bump into at night, huh, grandfather? The old man's long, experienced, aging eyes looked deep and stared with a horrific look into the terrified boy's face.
My boy, you haven't heard anything yet.
Eyes widened even more.
The grandfather said, "There are things even worse than Ishtargoi. For the very worst of souls, demons gather and say, in a dark, booming, grizzled voice, he said, 'Let them return, Prekolichi.'" The teeth of the child started to champ and chatter together. They sat there in silence for a minute, until he tried to say something, but his fear got caught in his voice, and so he swallowed it. And the grandchild said, "Well, what is a Prekolichi?" The grandfather looked from the dirt-soaked ground back at his pale-looking child and said, "The Prekolichi is a demon wolf-man that rises from the grave to bring a bloodthirsty terror to the lands, and an agonizing pain to our loved ones. When they leave the graves, they let all the lands and beasts and peoples know with a thunderous howl that he has arrived, and no one is safe. With arms like two logs, and a fan-filled mouth like daggers ready to pounce and tear their victims apart over the place, and with muscular hind legs that can propel them through the air faster than any of the quickest alabaster steed that the lands have ever birthed, which can catch you in the blink of an eye." The child could feel his heart starting to beat and pound like war drums echoing a battlefield. He started to breathe heavily with the fear of realizing what horrific creatures may be really lurking out there. But with a comforting voice of reassurance, the grandfather said to the child, "Hey, my little pup. It's okay. I tell you these tales of monsters and creatures of the night is to give you warning, to watch out for things like this, and to never venture in the dark woods where carnivores hide and lurk, and to go home before the sun sets and the moon rises." The fear of the child's face starts to decline, yet the glimpses of fear are still present. The grandfather said, "Besides, I'm not really sure if creatures like this actually exist. They're just tales told by our ancestors around the campfire to kill time. It's probably just my aging mind getting the better of me." The child's eyes start to become at ease with his words. And the grandchild continued the conversation while the grandfather started to attend the flock. "Well, if that's the case, I suppose suddenly the night air echoes a low, guttural wail that sends the shepherds' hearts into a deep, static fear and sends their bodies in a frightened state. The sheep, sensing the danger, start to go into an agitated state of alert. Bang starts to rise and give the location of whatever made that wail, that blood-curdling howl, their location.
What was that, grandfather?"
The child frantically said, quickly getting up from the ground. "Quickly! Put out that fire and raise the coals last area it came from." The child took his jacket off and doused the fire till the orange-yellow light went out, and using the lantern tried to see what made that call. The grandfather tried to calm the flock down, but it wasn't working. All the sheep were doing were looking left and right sides of the fields, ignoring the commands of the shepherd. It felt like 1,000 things were going through the boy's head.
"What's happening? Is it a pack of wolves? A non-native hunting party? Is it really true? Is the legends really true? Is it a Prekolichi? Oh, God,"
was the last thought that left his head until the herd started to run. For a moment the boy and his grandfather didn't know what to do. Do they attempt to round up their flock, or do they make a break into some part of the wood to make their blind way home? But as they start to try to decide, they notice something moving in the bushes in the same direction that the herd are making their way to. They stop
and a horrific melody of screams leaves the sheep's mouth, and all headed in different areas, except for one. While the sheep tried to run with the flock, an explosion erupted from the foliage, and out of it came a brown, jumping object with long arms facing the sheep, and a canine-looking humanoid popped out. And using its massive hand, it quickly wrapped its clawed hand around the sheep's head, grabbed it tightly, and ripped it off the body of the sheep. The eyes and mouths dropped in horror. Their fears were right. The supposed legend was standing way in front of them. Hunched over a freshly made carcass was a beast of vile proportions, with a bloody and saliva-covered maw. It was a 4-meter tall, canine-like beast with the head of a wolf, but stands on its 2 legs, arms strong like a tree, and eyes that remind them of hell. Ears twitching left and right, and claws, sharp and long like a Wallachian soldier's knife. And then the blood began to rise when, in the process of eating its kill, it looked up at them, and their hearts sank. The creature lifted itself off the ground and stared back at them, breathing heavily and deeply, drooling blood and mucus from its fanged-filled maw. And in the blink of an eye, it began to barrel toward them with glowing red eyes of hate. "Get back to the house!" the grandfather screams. Frightened, the boy does exactly what his grandfather says, running towards home while the old man and the bleating sheep head off in the opposite direction. However, with the rush of adrenaline being his main focus, he remembers that he and his grandfather got lost in these woods, and being so young, his sense of direction is not yet keen. In a matter of seconds, he's lost. Then, off in the distance, the boy hears the screams of the sheep, followed by his grandfather crying out. But the cry is cut short. The lantern begins to die, and then disappears into the shadows, and all is silent around him again, until he hears it. The growl comes so close behind him. He turns and sees the feral eyes of hell, and in its last howl, he screams. The boy's eyes close for what he thinks is his last cry, and wakes up, replacing the vision of the dark woods with the familiar sight of his own bedroom. He takes his first sigh of genuine relief, thinking it was all just a dream, until he looks down at his chest and sees it stitched up and bandaged with deep claw marks that sting him like a hot razor blade from hell, stinging him every time he touches it. Then it all starts to flood back to him. The Prakolichi did attack him, and it bit into his chest, and he remembers the feeling. It felt like hot anvils with serrated knives pressing and crushing down on him, ripping a piece of him and tearing its claws into him, almost chopping his arm off. But how did he survive? Is the real question. He starts to hyperventilate to know the matter of his survival, and then in a scream, "Mama!" And it echoes the house, and the thunderous sounds of creaking stumps of the old floorboards came all of a sudden. Bursting through the door was the boy's mother, and asks him if he's okay. The boy, in a panicked confusion, says, I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened to me." And then a thought of horror crossed his mind. "Wait, what happened to grandfather?" The mother quickly calmed and reassured the boy that everything is fine.
You got lost in the woods. The both of you did. So your father and I went out searching till we saw smoke being put out, and your grandfather's call. And so we rushed to help you and found you on the ground with severe wounds and some large bear roaring at us. Good thing your father brought his rifle with him and shot at the creature, scaring it away. We were in a dreadful panic. Your wounds were fatal, and we didn't know how long you had. I could feel my heart in my throat. I felt useless. My sweet little boy was on the verge of death, and I wasn't there to protect you. But I knew I could heal you from this attack, and I used those 14 years of medical training to good use and help you from your wounds. It will take you about a week for you to be able to walk. The boy, a common voice, said, and grandfather, it's fine, she said. We found him not far from where you were, and we managed to bring him home too. His wounds are a little more fatal than yours, but he's recovering. He's just a bit unconscious and resting. Your father is out there wrangling the sheep, making sure that bear's away from the house. The child's eyes widened and his pupils dilated. And with a scared voice he said, No, 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 don't let him do that. Bring him back. It wasn't a bear. It had the head of a wolf and stood on its hind legs. It may look like a bear, but it most certainly wasn't. It was a Precolici, an undead wolf man. The mother gave a look that tells the boy she thinks he's being hysterical. My sweet child, there's no such thing as a Precolici. They're just myths and tales told by old mad men. But, no, I saw it with my own eyes. It was more horrifying than any beast that walks the earth. I swear to you I saw it. I'm not making it up. The mother calms his frantic examples and asks, Well, my child, tell me, was your grandfather telling you about this creature? And the boy gave an embarrassed whisper. Yeah, yes, he did. And in reply, well, maybe the reason you saw this Precolici was because you were listening to your grandfather's tale and it clogged your mind and made you a bit hysterical. Well, yes. Excuse me, the boy acceptingly said. I believe so, Mama. He was talking to me about how evil dead people sometimes return as Precolici instead of Guy, and I should be careful in the forest. I suppose he was only halfly right, halfly telling the truth. Though not terribly pleased with her father for scaring her son, she realized why he told him this. He told him these types of stories as a way of discouraging him from wandering deep into the woods where many real wolves and bears hunt. And tonight she sees his caution. She assures her son once more that everyone is all right and safe, and no Precolici are lurking about. She kisses him on his cheek, tucks him under his quilt, and leaves the boy back to sleep. Despite his mother's comforting words and reasonable conclusion, he still felt trouble. His mother may have told him otherwise about the Precolici, but she wasn't there. He definitely knows what he saw. The wolf head on top a bare, man-fused body, with arms like logs attached to claws that function more like axes. He knows what he smelt, that putrid, rotten stench of blood and dog saliva. He knows what he heard, the howl like a thunderstorm from hell. And of course, he knows what it felt like. Pain of unimaginable proportions, hot venom like feeling running through his blood and feeling his body being torn apart. Things like this, he thinks, will haunt his mind and soul as he
stares at the ceiling for some time. But then his body got the better of him, and as he almost drifted off to sleep, he heard something. He heard scratching taps coming outside his bedroom window. When he turned to see what it was, he saw that in the window, where there shouldn't have been anything but moonlight, was a grinning, sadistic face. Pale to the point of luminescence, with eyes that glowed red like two coals tossed in the snow, with its skin so transparent that you can see the outline of its skull. Through the features on the face were soft and inviting. There was something blackish red smeared across its lips and chin. And as the grin grew, the boy gasped. Behind the smile was a mass of long, sharp teeth with raven-colored, damp, greasy hair that was falling out, and in a gentle yet croaky manic tone, the thing spoke. "I heard your screams," the thing whispered. "You are afraid of the Precolici? But you have nothing to fear, little one. I can protect you from the monsters far better than your brother ever could." The boy sat up slowly, his eyes widening, his entire body quivering. "Just open the door, and we can go back into the woods and play and run and skip and frolic, and you never have to be afraid again." The boy's mind then finally made a petrifying realization. This vampiric monster was
Strigoi,
he said. The handle of the window, like it had a mind of its own, opened magically, and the boy was terrified by the mere presence. But at the back of his head there was that voice telling him that he's somewhat safe. The handle of the window was locked, so it couldn't get in. But when he saw it open without the Strigoi interacting with it, he knew safety was no longer applied here. "I am your friend," it said, pushing away the window and crawling inside like an unholy snake. "The last friend that you ever have." The creature disappeared, but it gave him no reassurance, for he still can hear it crawling around his room, and its decaying voice echoed everywhere. "And the only friend that you ever need." It reappeared at the end of his bed and quickly crawled towards him with spindly claws reaching ever so more to his face. "And I want to play with you." It grabbed the back of his head, and it pulled his neck towards its drooling mouth, and two canine teeth grew longer, and before proceeding, it took one final breath of air and said, "Just relax, and the pain will be over soon." "What?" It then bit into his neck and started to drain the boy of his blood. A feeling felt like a paralyzing venom was coursing through his veins, clogging up any part that allows him to move and dissolving the blood and flesh from the inside. He tried to move, he tried to scream, he tried to fight back, and he tried to plead to it to stop and spare him. But he just couldn't. He felt like his life was leaving his body, attempting to grip onto his soul and hold there, but it kept slipping through him. The pain was it was something he never felt ever in his life. The feeling of wasps from hell jabbing into his neck was so excruciating. He wanted all to stop, but alas, he couldn't. And there was one thing that he could do, though, to stop it, and it was accept his fate and hope it would all be over soon. Dark, I know. Well, that was my short story. Jesus, 30 minutes long. I do hope you enjoyed this long story, and I fucking appreciate it that you took the time out of your busy life and just listened to what I like coming up with. Yeah, I understand that the story was a bit dark, but I do kind of like doing that stuff. I'm not that type of person that likes drawing rainbows and buttercups and Shrek happily ever after or something. No, I like doing dark stories because, well, it's more realistic. It's obviously life isn't about, well, life doesn't have its happiness and glee. It does occasionally, but it is mainly a lot of dark stuff. Not to say that I don't like writing happy endings. I do like writing happy endings, but it's just more fun for me to write dark stories. But yeah, I hope that wasn't too dark for you. Please, if you enjoy this, tell me, because it helps me unimaginable. It helps me so much to know that what I'm doing is good and I can keep doing it. So, thank you for sticking so long to the end, and catch you later. I'm going to do something else now. See ya!